I am Dr. Rana Al-Falaki, your host for today for another episode of Be Free, Be Fun, and Be Fearless. I am thrilled to be joined today by a man. I know it's not very usual, but it does happen every now and again. So I'm joined by Mike Stewart. And now Mike does something that I believe is so incredibly important. He teaches you how to communicate. And you think, oh, boring. What do you mean communicate? I'm already a good communicator. But did you know that if you don't communicate, your relationship can fail completely? And as men in particular, finding a way to communicate effectively, to be able to open up without it being all wishy-washy and gushy. There's no need for that, but there are effective ways and tools in which you as men can communicate with your woman, with your wife, with your significant other, to enhance and grow or reignite that relationship. And that is exactly what Mike does. So over to you, my friend. Hello.
Hey, Rana, how are you today?
I am wonderful. Welcome from across the ocean.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So did I get that more or less right?
Yes, you did. Yes, everything was correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that, how you got into it, the relevance and importance of well, why is it so important to be able to communicate in this way?
Well, the way I got into it was when COVID hit. I'd been working on my coaching for the last year, and when COVID hit, I kept seeing stories about marriages were failing, the divorce rate was going up, there was a lot more abuse, a lot of domestic issues going on between families, husbands and wives particularly. And so I wanted to take the skills that I had and I wanted to make a difference for people. I know that I can help them. And so that's why I started this company, is to be able to do that, is to be able to help them communicate more effectively so that we have less divorce, we have less domestic violence, and we have less families breaking up, kids losing their parents, or parents fighting over their kids. Those are the things that I'm committed to changing in the world today.
Yeah, and I can hear the passion in your voice just as you start talking about that. But of course, some of it comes from personal experience, right?
Yes.
Would you like to share a little bit
Sure.
about that with us?
Yeah. So what happened for me was in 2010, my wife and I we started our own business, and we didn't know how to run a business. And within 2 years, we lost all of our money and found ourselves applying for food stamps. And the stress of it almost killed my wife. And we didn't know how to talk about that after it happened. It's like we lost our dream. And but the problem that really happened was my wife's health started deteriorating more and more after that business closed. And after 6 months, her hands became more like claws. She couldn't use her hands. I couldn't touch her, or she would scream because her whole body her whole nervous system was out of whack. And she went into the hospital, and they said she was in kidney failure. And within 3 days, her organs were going to shut down unless she had a blood transfusion. And so she'd been hospitalized for 3 weeks. But when I realized that I could lose my wife, my best friend, everything changed for me. I realized I don't want to live without her. And early before that, when we didn't have insurance, and that's one of the reasons why she didn't get care right away, was we were trying to get into the doctor, but we had no money and we had no insurance. And so I kept thinking about the money. When she first had to go into the hospital, it was like, oh gosh, this is going to cost so much money, rather than just thinking, hey, my wife's in danger in her life and she could die. But when she was in that hospital bed and I had to go through watching them try to get blood out of her and they couldn't find it, and the nurses are freaking out. She's freaking out. And I'm like, when I realized that I could lose her, it's like everything went back to my wedding day of, I love this woman. I married this woman. I don't want to lose her. I want to live with her until one of us naturally dies. And as time went on, after we got out of that situation, she was hospitalized for 3 weeks, and then we were home. Well, then there was a year and a half to get her back to functioning, and I was her caregiver. And during that time, we even though we couldn't go out of the house, we were very little, we became close again, because I saw how much pain she was in, and she could see everything that was going on in me. And we weren't arguing to that time, because I just had so much love for her, and she couldn't help herself. And so, my goal is to not let other relationships get to that point where you lose that love that you had on your wedding day when you were dating your spouse. Your significant other, the person you were dating, could do nothing wrong. They were perfect. You knew you wanted to spend the rest of your life with them. But then little things happen in your relationship. Some are outside yourself that brings stress. And each one of those stressful things that you begin to blame your spouse for becomes a little brick. And those little bricks become a wall. And pretty soon you and your spouse are living different lives. And so my goal is to tear down that wall between couples.
I love that, Mike. And what you just said was so true. I think sometimes especially with relationships, sometimes more than other things, we're willing to see the bad, especially when we're tired and we don't communicate. We expect that person to know what we need. We've had a really exhausting day. They should know that we need them to cook dinner, or they should know that we need them to sort something out. And we tell ourselves stories that they don't care. And then all we do is we keep telling ourselves these stories and these stories and these stories about all their bad qualities. And we just can't see past the wall and remember that wedding day and all those amazing qualities. And actually, that reminds me, I know before you shared a story with me about that, about your wife. I think it was when you moved and you had a load of boxes.
Yes. Yeah. So a week right after our honeymoon, we got home. That following week, I went to work, and my wife went to work. We both were working at the time. And I got home from work early that day, which was a rare occasion. And I started just unpacking boxes, but I thought I was going to, start unpacking. Well, my wife came home and she asked me why I didn't start dinner. And I told her, well, I don't do the cooking. And she said, well, what do you mean? We cooked while we were on our honeymoon and everything. I said, well, my mom always did the cooking when I was growing up. And she goes, well, I'm not your mom. And it was the realization to me that I had taken the model that I grew up with in my household, and I was applying that to, as now I'm married, so this is what I do now, is I don't have to cook. I don't have to clean. My wife's going to do all that. And that's the part of the problem, is we grow up and something's modeled for us, and we unconsciously live that model if we don't have the ability to acknowledge it or see it and change it. And so that's one of the things I found is impacting a lot of couples' relationships, is they don't address that, or they don't observe their behavior and those unconscious habits. And that's what kind of causes things to break down.
It's funny. I had a similar story when my kids were younger, and we come around to Mother's Day, but they weren't old enough to sort of make a fuss of me yet. And I remember my husband saying, well, and you had all these different husbands, and to me, they were just being these amazing, amazing men to their wives, looking after them, making a fuss of them on Mother's Day. And he'd return to me and say, well, but you're not my mother. I don't need to make a fuss of you. You're not my mother. And it's like, yes, but I am a mother. I'm a mother to your kids. And he didn't get it. But of course, it was the way that he had been modeled. Now, the other aspect I was hearing you say is you were busy unpacking boxes. So it isn't that you were sitting idle on the couch having a beer.
Right.
You were still doing something, and yet you weren't doing the thing that she felt she needed to feel looked after.
Right. Well, we never talked about how we were going to live together when we were married. And that's something that's never taught to us. We're not taught how to do relationship effectively. We're taught how to manage money. We're taught history. We're taught math in school, but we're not taught how to cohabitate together with another person. And it's great when you're dating or you're living in separate locations or even couples that are living together. But then when they get married, it's that commitment that they've made that seems to change things. And they go back to that pattern that they saw their parents grow up with.
Is that what
And
you?
without the tools to be able to recognize that, you really can't see what's going on.
So, because this happens a lot sometimes when you get couples who can be together for years, and yet the minute they sign that document, things seem to change. Why is that, Mike?
I think as soon as they get married, they go back to the marriage model that they grew up with their parents and how their parents interacted. And I didn't realize this until I started looking back over my own life and marriage relationships with my son's friends, their parents, and the dynamic of, and then because you'll hear them tell stories about their parents or their moms, and you can see they're living the exact same way as their parents did, because they don't realize, in some cases, they don't even realize it's a destructive pattern.
So they can have this amazing, wonderful relationship that may even be cohabiting, boyfriend, girlfriend, partnerships in some way or other, whatever sex that happens to be. And yet, the minute they sign the marriage document, they forget what they had and the strengths of their relationship and try to fit into the model that they were brought up in. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, that's correct.
The very strong pull. Wow.
Yeah.
So, so tell us a little bit about your wedding day, however long it was, and then when it started to seem less, the relationship became less magical.
So my wedding day was magical. I mean, my wife and I, we planned it for a year, and I mean, my mouth hurt at the end of the day. I can remember all the faces of my friends and family that were there to support us. In fact, I had a friend of mine who created a video. He went around and interviewed all of my family and friends at the video that he could do. At the wedding. And he asked them 5 questions. Where do you think they would be in 10 years? How many kids do you think they're going to have? Is he going to be, are they going to be successful? Will the marriage last? And I watched that video minimum 1 time a year to recapture that day, because I don't ever want to forget that day and how much love I had for my wife on that day, because that love is still there. It's just buried by all this other stuff that we've piled on top of it. Or like I said, that wall that we've kind of built, it blocks our view from that love that we had on our wedding day or even when we were dating. And so it's doing the work to tear down that wall is what really makes the changes.
So that's a great tip, is to engage and it's not just the men. I think it's both
It's both,
sides
yeah.
can do it, right? Spend a
Yeah.
bit of time going back and looking at the wedding video or the wedding photos or the wedding book,
Yeah.
whatever memento is there, and just remember what you used to have, and because you could find a way back to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know before your wife, did the difficulties in the relationship come about once she got sick, or was it happening prior to that? Because presumably you were sitting there trying to run this business together and it was failing. I mean, there's huge stress. It's very easy to start to distance from each other even at that point.
Well, that we didn't have a problem with our relationship while we were working together. I mean, we were working 12 hours a day, and we both had a goal of helping people. We were holding weight loss classes of up to 25 people, and those classes were full, but again, we weren't managing the money. And so, you know, part of the problem there was my wife would constantly look at the numbers of our bank account going down, and the stress kept building up. And so we kind of didn't talk about that. That was just kind of an off subject. We were more committed on trying to continue to build the business. But early on in our marriage, with like 2 years into our marriage, we wanted to kind of get some tools in case we had problems. And we went to a pastor who told us, he sat down, and I was going to be mentored to be a pastor by this man. And this man told my wife and I that we should have never been married, that she's not the woman for me, that he needs somebody stronger than her. Well, I was so surprised by what he said and hurt, because this guy was going to be my mentor. I didn't have any words to defend my wife on that day. I didn't have the tools to ask him why, really go into why he thought that. And my wife was like, "Hey, we're leaving." But as I think I mentioned in a previous conversation with you, is she actually was hurt for many, many years that I didn't defend her in front of him. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that she understood that, oh, he did choose me. He does love me. I am right for him. And it goes back to many other things. My wife saw the son that we adopted on a month after we were married, before she ever met me, in a dream. And so that was the thing that woke her up to that everything was planned to be just the way it is. And we shortly left that church because we realized if our pastor's not going to support our marriage, then, but the biggest thing is I cried like a baby on my wedding day. It was the most important commitment to me I've ever made in my life, to, commit my life to someone and not realizing if I could be a good husband. And so I took that commitment seriously. And yeah, there were times where, things got in the way and we had our arguments, but, when you have the proper tools, there can be no topic that you can't talk about in a respectful way and get through whatever situation that you're facing together.
Now, there's a very important lesson, I think, to be drawn out from that story with your pastor, because so often when we are in a relationship and we're not feeling quite right about it, especially as women, actually, we'll go off and we'll moan to our girlfriends, perhaps more than a guy might sort of in the UK, go down the pub and have a pint of beer, but and sort of pretend defiance, but we'll talk to our girlfriends. But it's interesting what you say, because what's coming to mind is the need to remember that ultimately it's just the two of you in that relationship.
Yeah.
Your friends, it doesn't matter what they think and how they choose to judge, because they are not the ones in that relationship. And it can be very easy for us to bow down to peer pressure and seek approval from externals, approvals from our friends and from our family of whether they think this person is right for us or not, because they may not fit the typical bill of what, but yet the two of you know and have chosen to be together. And that's what I was hearing from that story about your pastor, because he got in between you and you were completely dumbfounded and didn't say anything, but your wife interpreted your lack of speech as lack of support for her. And yet that wasn't actually it. And perhaps if at that point you'd learned to communicate with her that I was just quiet because I was just incredulous to what he was saying, as opposed to the story she told herself of, you were quiet, you had doubts about me.
Yeah, well, the other thing that I can tell you is later on in our marriage, we had another issue where, my son would not, his wife would not talk to my wife. It was always, "Hey, Lonnie, can you go talk to your mom about this? Can you go talk to your dad about this?" And it's just another example of if she had the right tool, she could come to me and not have any fear whatsoever. And I told my wife, am I going to scream at her? Am I going to yell at her? Am I going to hit her? Why can't she come and ask me a question? And it's amazing when we look at it from the outside. And I'll go back to one of the things that you mentioned was, I have two good friends that their husbands left them after 20 years of marriage, and it had to do with their husband was hanging out with single friends. And those single friends are like, they're constantly, I have no responsibilities, I'm a free person, and so you need to surround yourself with friends that support your marriage relationship. It's very key that you have friends that know your wife and they know you and they know that you are committed to your marriage and that they're going to support you in that. Otherwise, they're going to try and pull you away to go have fun with them because they're not concerned about you or your wife or your marriage relationship. So you need to surround yourself with people that are going to support you in your marriage.
Yeah, rather than draw a rift in between it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what ideas can you give us about how we need to be talking to each other? You've mentioned it a few times. Oh, if they came and communicated with me in the right way, I would have been open to it. Well, what does that consist of?
Well, the first step that you have to take is you have to forgive yourself for whatever things you've done in the marriage to create the separation. You have to forgive yourself, because that's coloring how you're interacting with your spouse or significant other. Every time you talk, you're viewing them in a certain way because of something you did or something they did. And so if you don't forgive yourself and forgive your spouse for the past hurts, then those are always coloring your interaction.
Now that must be easier said than done, Mike, because
it is. Yeah.
What if you're at the point where you don't take responsibility, where you think it's all coming from the other party anyway?
Well, that's where you have to, it only takes one person to repair the relationship. If they really both love each other, it only takes one person to repair the relationship.
Explain that a bit more.
Excuse me?
Explain that a bit more.
Okay, so what happens is, like I just mentioned, if I continue to look at my wife, in fact, I had a situation, I'll go back to when she was sick. I was complaining that she wasn't doing enough to stay healthy to not be as sick as she was getting and going to cost us money to go in the hospital. That was running in the background. It didn't stop me from taking care of my wife, but it did still stop me at times from interacting with her in a way that would be more compassionate. Okay, there were times I lost it. And out of frustration. But by being able to let that go and really look at my wife and realize that she can't help it. She's helpless. And I'm blaming her. But it took me a while to realize that. And I had to forgive myself for losing our business and what it did to her and not catching it soon enough to close our business for the sake of her health. And I had to come to terms and forgive myself for that. And but it's being able, that forgiveness is the first step. It's forgiveness for yourself in what you did, and it's forgiveness for your spouse in what they did. And it's trying to talk about that. And when you go to your spouse and you say, hey, I need you to forgive me for what I said that upset you, or what, you know what I mean? So you start that. One person just has to start the process, and it brings love back into that relationship by your spouse seeing that you didn't mean to hurt them, or what you said was, out of anger, and you didn't mean it. And so when we come in, we talk about that in a way, that's authentic, and we share our heart based on the love and respect that we had for them, then that breaks down the wall for them too. It actually opens up another, because it's not our normal behavior. If our normal behavior is to argue over things, and one of the person comes and says, I don't want to argue anymore, I love you, this whatever this is can't become between us in this way. And we need to look at this. We need to sit down and work together to stop this, because
that takes
it's unconscious.
A lot of strength. It takes a lot of strength in a big person to be prepared to do that.
Well, but the thing is, see, most people on an average day, they don't know what they think about. They don't, when we begin to think a thought, we think about things, and if we continually think those, they become automatic thoughts. And then they're just running in the background. We don't know, we don't recognize them, but they're there running in the background. How we look at people, how we interact with our spouse, and how we even, you know, manage our kids. All those things are running in the background, and it's the pattern that we have to catch that's destructive, and find what's not serving us and observe it, and then stop it and replace it with a new habit.
Okay, so can you give us an example, another example?
Yeah. I came into a situation it was just a couple months ago. I mean, COVID hit. I'm not able to work. I have a computer business that I'm running on the side also, and my wife's not working, and she's capable of working now. Well, I started getting stressed out because the bills are piling up, and you know, and I don't have enough money to pay the bills. And I'm trying to get her to go to work, and I don't have enough confidence to go to work. What if my hands cramp up? What if, you know, she still has some nerve issues? And so I had to let her know that, you know what, when you're ready to go to work, you can go to work. I don't want you to go to work because I'm telling you to. I want you to go to work because you want to. And there's a big difference in that. I mean, I could, and I could still hold that against her, but what good is it going to do? It keeps me separate from her, and she shuts down. She'll begin to not talk about things like that anymore, about work or money, because she knows what you know, my response was, well, you need to get a job and help. And so I had to come to terms and say, right now, she's not comfortable working, and I can't change that. And I just need to do the best that I can with the skills that I have, and help her plug her in to women that are going to empower her on her own time, so that she can help out when she wants to, and then she can, you know, regain that confidence, because she's still not confident. We used to both be in networking groups, and she had her own essential oil business, but she lost her confidence because the people that were around her, they don't work, they don't have any aspirations. The girlfriends that she had, none of them really encouraged her to pursue her dream of having her own essential oil business. And so she just kind of thought, well, I can just hang out and not do anything, you know. And she's an amazing person. She has so many gifts. I mean, it's crazy.
So I'm hearing again the surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, even on that level.
Yeah.
And I'm also hearing you. Actually, I've got a question for you, because I know in the communication I teach as part of my program to enhance relationships, be it work or personal, and we talk about needs-based communication and explaining your need under a request. Now, your need for her to go out to work was to help relieve some of the underlying stress. How effectively had you communicated that need? That's question one. I shouldn't really stack, but I'm going to. So A, how effectively had you communicated that need? And B, how can somebody cope with the fact that the other person can't meet their needs? Because as in your wife's case, the need for her own self-care.
Right. And so the main thing you have to do is you have to accept things as they are, and you can't make them mean anything. So, you know, I have to accept that my wife is still healing emotionally from the loss of our business, and physically from her health. And I communicate that to her and let her know that. And again, you know, I continually tell her how amazing she is, and that she has gifts, because she'll talk about these aspirations of writing about her. She was supposed to die. She was supposed to have a 5-year shelf life with the disease that she got, and she should have been dead, you know, in theory, you know, 2-3 years ago. But she's thriving. Her doctors are amazed at her results, and it has to do with she's still going through a healing process of, regaining her confidence as a contributor in the home. She's starting to take more responsibility in cooking more meals, and we cook together now. I mean, we just enjoy making a plan and cooking all of our meals together. And then it just depends around my PC repair business work schedule that I do on the side. I help a lot of seniors with their computers.
So I'm hearing one of the things that needs to be done is the process of forgiveness. So accepting your responsibility in the role for why this relationship may be breaking down, and forgiving yourself for the role that you've had, and forgiving the other person. And at the same time, even if one of you starts to shift, the other person will start to shift in response.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing, the next step that you need to do is you need to realize that you're not broken and your spouse isn't broken either. There's nothing wrong with either of you. Your life is exactly where it is because of the experiences that you've had in your life. And each of us have to take responsibility for that. But we also have to look at, we were never taught how to do this. And there's all the self-help books that you can read, but it has to be experiential for you to really get it and apply it. I mean, it has to be something like this. If you were to do a Zoom class like you are on your coaching on communication, you would actually have your participants pair up and do that exercise.
Because it's not easy. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy at all.
All this need-based and non-violent communication, people are like, yeah, okay, I get it. I get what you say, but it's so hard to put it into practice. But there is the key word: practice, 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 right?
Yeah. But again, it takes practice. You have to let down that wall. When that wall is up, I mean, even just 5 years ago, I went out in public into these business meetings, and I felt so inferior because I had failed as a business owner. And I had to go through my own healing process to get over that. But I realized that that's in the past. And my goal right now is to help people with my experience. I mean, I wrote a book out of that experience of losing my business called Earning Money with Passion and Purpose. And it's about all the skills of all the mistakes I made that I want to save other small business owners from making. And I always want to take the problems that I've solved for myself and share them with other people, especially when you see people struggling.
Yeah. So put it to greater use. But for example, something like that, and actually this is very, very, very relevant to what's going on in current times. People have got much more financial stress. They're losing their businesses. They're losing their livelihood. And that's going to come into a relationship. How can you avoid it impacting on your relationship? Because you'll be sat there processing a ton of stuff, like you say, feeling like a failure, feeling like you've let people down. I think for a man, if you have the provider role, feeling quite emasculated that you're no longer the provider or you can't provide for your family, there could be so much stuff going on that will inadvertently impact on your relationship. You're not going to be all lovey-dovey with your wife at that point because you're processing so much other stuff. So how can you avoid that?
Well, the way you avoid it is you have to share how you feel with your wife. I mean, when I left my job after 30 years and told my wife I wanted to quit my job and start our own business, I was walking away from an $80,000 a year salary to having to do everything myself and find my own customers and everything else. And it was very, very scary, but we talked about it. I could have been in my head about it and got angry. I mean, that's the biggest problem is, I mean, Tony Robbins has this saying that when you're in your head, you're dead because you're not living in reality. You create your own story to protect yourself based on what your experience has been in. I mean, if like, an example is if you've been hurt in some way and there's something that happens in the relationship that triggers that, those feelings all come back right away. But if you don't communicate that, then your spouse is in the dark, and you walk away with this story in your mind still, and then you're still reacting, you're treating your spouse based on that story. And so when you come to grips with that and you say, hey, listen, I had this thought today. It could be as simple as this. I had a thought today, you might be having an affair. And you're like, well, why would you think that? And you would talk that out. Well, I could just go into this, I know she's having an affair, and let me go find evidence about it. And I could create this whole story around it. And then when you have that in your mindset, every little thing she says, I would use that as evidence to see, she's having an affair. And that's one of the things that we do, is when we have this story going on in our mind, our spouse can make the most innocent response, and we gather evidence to validate our story, even though it's not true. But if we talk about it to our spouse, what we're thinking, the story goes away.
So this has to be a team effort, because you have to ensure that the spouse doesn't jump down their throat or be judgmental about the other's thoughts and feelings.
That's true, but if you're coming from a place of love, if you're coming from that place on your wedding day where you committed to love and respect till death do you part, and you share that from your heart, if your spouse wants that back, you're gonna be able to heal. It's gonna take work, but you are gonna be able to heal it. And sometimes one person wants to give up, and at some point in a marriage, you have to accept that. If they're not willing to do the work to stay married, then you have to just make decisions based on where you're going to go from there.
But like
because 10 you really can't change the other person.
So like 10 years into the marriage, you haven't got any more distractions. You can't have any more kids. You've done that bit. You've closed shop. You haven't got a house to buy. You haven't got a business to build. There are no more distractions. So you're sat there staring at your wife, who may have put on a little bit of weight at the same time. And, and you can see the grass, like you say, looks greener on the other side. Some of your other friends have gotten divorced as well. So they're all single, and they're all like, oh, all right, mate, come and join us. Life is amazing on the other side, which, probably isn't the case. And yet what you're talking about is the need to reignite through, what I'm hearing you say is through showing your true self. Showing who you were. Of course we change in 10 years, but there was obviously a core essence that brought the two of you together. And how can you reignite that when you can't distract yourself from it anymore, which is, like you said, the COVID situation has stopped people distracting themselves. So what have you got to say about that?
Well, what we do is we decided to make it a priority that we go on a date every week. And sometimes it's just a day trip up to a beach town up north of us. So we're out of our normal environment, and we're really back. My wife and I, that's what we did when we were dating. We went to a bunch of little beach towns and walked the streets of Carmel, and there's a little village in Carmel that you would walk around, and we would walk into these stores, and the little alleyways would continue almost for another block. And so those are fond memories that we have. And so we recapture that. We go back to the places that we dated, and it's the love is there. Those are special times that both of us had together. And that's one way to recapture that, is go back to the places where you fell in love, when you were dating. And sometimes that's in a different country, but you need to find a way to get away from the hustle and bustle on a regular basis and make your relationship a priority again. And what's happening right now is, kids have so many sporting activities, and, mom's a taxi cab all day long, dad's at work all day long, and they both come home together and they're both exhausted, and they don't have time for one another, and they don't make time. But as you said, after 10 years, the kids are gone. There are no more distractions. And so you need to go back to where you were in the beginning, which was you spent time together. When my wife and I were dating, I couldn't wait to see her. I'd talk to her on the phone for 2 hours because I couldn't see her, and that's all those desires are still there that you had when on your wedding day. They're just covered up by all the stories and all of our trauma that we've had. And that's where we've got to heal the trauma to get back to the love relationship.
Yeah.
And if we don't do that, we continue in the same thing. We keep going further and further apart.
Till you're living separate lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Emotionally and physically.
Okay. So yeah, I'm hearing a lot of needing to dig deeper, needing to take responsibility, needing to engage in forgiveness and stop the blame game as well.
Yeah.
And then needing to be very open about stuff and almost making a deal on the table that you need to both be open and just not to jump down each other's throat just because the other person says how they're feeling. Date nights, or spending quality time to reignite or remember why you married the person in the first place. Mm-hmm. Watching your marriage video or marriage memorabilia, whatever, re-engaging in that, so remembering why you married the person in the first place. But you take people through a specific program, men through a specific program, right, to help them with this.
Yes.
Because a lot of what you're talking about is engaging in feelings, and so how receptive are men to doing that kind of program?
Well, when you get them to look at, when you find out that they really love their wife, that's when things begin to change, and you begin to help them.
What if they've got to the stage where they don't think they love them? Because that does happen. To the point where it's only when you separate that you realize, oh God, I really did love them. But you're so blinded by all the rubbish and the sludge and the things that have happened, you don't feel the love.
Right, but that's when you start to unpack things with men. That's what happened to me. It was I just learned that I can either be right or I could be divorced. Really, I can either keep building my case and keep telling myself that what she did was so wrong, even though she's saying, I'm so sorry, I want to make it better. And I can either continue to hold on to that. And that's where the forgiveness comes from. When we look at forgiveness, a lot of people think that forgiveness is letting the other person off the hook. But forgiveness is freeing ourselves from the negative energy that is dragging us down, and it's pushing our spouse away. The negative energy that we hold on to, whether what's something they did or whatever. But it's that forgive. That's why we start with forgiveness. Is that has to be the key. And when you begin to forgive yourself and you forgive your spouse, you begin to see a different person. All that the blame and all the things that you have piled up aren't there anymore. And you could see your spouse for who they were on your wedding day. You could see them as that beautiful bride or that beautiful groom, that handsome groom. But it's taken them through the process, and it's not an easy process. But the main thing is it takes practice, because you have to reprogram those habits reprogram those thoughts and habits that have gotten to where you are today. And most of those patterns have become unconscious. And when you begin to observe them and observe your actions, that's how you can change them.
So what I'm hearing, and what I think you're alluding to, is that you might not feel love at that point, because of course you're just so distant. You're at poles, and yet so it's needing to have the desire to save the relationship and taking the necessary steps. And if you just have the faith, if you keep going in that direction, there's a very good chance that the feeling of love will then reignite.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, amazing. Good. I'm loving this. Okay, good. Right. So we're like this. We started to communicate. We're coming together. I'm feeling something. A warm, fuzzy feeling is starting to come back. We're halfway there. How do we get back to that again?
You get back to that by practicing it, and you get back to that by communicating when you feel other, when you have those negative thoughts that come back, you need to just be open with your spouse about it. And you can even tell them, hey, I'm dealing with this again. I need your help. I need your help to help me. I've put this aside, but this thought keeps coming back, and I don't want that in between us. And so if you see this, I give you permission. That's the other thing we need to do, is we need to give our spouse permission to not correct us, but help us see what if we're committed to rebuilding the relationship, and I begin to do something that I had a thing in the past that was separating us, I give my spouse permission to say, you know what, you're doing that thing again, and and then I need to come clean. I need to go, I'm sorry, and that's not who I want to be, and I'm going to change that, and we just work on it together. Because that's what happens with most marriages is, like you said, one person decides, I don't want it. I didn't sign up for this. But when you go back to the commitment that you made till death do us part, and you really take that to heart, that this was the person you decided you were going to spend the rest of your life with, then you can, when you make that decision and you go back and you hold yourself to that accountability, then everything's workable. You can work anything out. It's
important to say here that we're not, because I know I shared with you when we had a talk earlier, I think I cried sort of on the airplane the next day after I got married on the honeymoon on our way to Canada, and I just burst into tears. So we're not saying to everybody, that you have to save your relationship, and you would refer people on if that was the case. What we're saying is your typical clients are, so we're not talking about people who are being abused or anything like that. What we're saying is that if you are consciously making a decision that there is something there, that you can remember how much you truly did love that person on your wedding day, you didn't cry your eyes out. In other words, you want to, you and therefore have that commitment to save it and want to work on it, then you can help them.
Yes.
Okay. So to give us a few details about your program, because we've talked around it a lot, and I know it is actually quite a specific structure.
Yeah. So it's an 8-week program that takes you through each step. Again, the first step is forgiveness. The second step is going through and looking how neither your spouse or you are broken. And then we go through we'll separate the spouses, and a woman can take the course, and they go and they do the next couple of exercises separately. And then they come back together and on week 7, and they begin to create a new plan for their marriage based on the new foundation that they've set. Because what we do is we break down what each person wants in the marriage separately. They're doing that work separately, and then they come back together, and then they create a new plan, a new foundation to go moving forward. The past is gone. They're still going to have things crop up, but they have those skills now to deal with those things when they crop up. And then they'll be able to create new rules for operating in their marriage that builds love and respect again, and it continues to build unity instead of separation.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So here's a question for you. What would you say to something like, a lot of people would have heard of the love languages, for example, and they use that as a foundation for their relationship and understanding that they're speaking to different needs and therefore having to come together. Does your program encompass any of that, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, we talk about that, not in the specifics of the 5 love languages, but you have to find out how your spouse wants to be communicated to. It's similar to what we do as business owners. You find out whether your client wants to be texted or emailed or whatever. You find out how your spouse wants to be communicated. And so if your spouse requires that she needs to be touched every day, you need to touch your spouse every day, whether it's a hug or it's a shoulder rub or it's a kiss on the cheek, whatever it may be. And again, as a woman, you need to continue to validate that love for your wife, because, you know, like what happened to my wife, one statement from another person made her doubt that we should have been married. And so you need to validate every morning. I kiss my wife goodbye and I say, I love you. I will see you in a few minutes or an hour or whatever it is. And I make sure she knows that. And there's times where she'll go, did you kiss me goodbye this morning? I was still asleep. And I go, yes, I did. And we have a way. We actually make sure that we touch hands until our hands, you know, we rub hands together as we leave. That's kind of our parting handshake kind of thing. So we have all these little things that we try to do just to keep things alive, you know. And like I said, we many times twice a week we'll go out we'll pick up a meal at a restaurant and head out to the beach and just listen to the ocean, watch the otters play, and those are things we did while we were dating. And so it's like, and we come back just totally recharged and refreshed.
Yeah. So again, it's about reigniting, but what would you say to the people who are still in the stage of having young kids where there's a lot of stress, that they can't afford the luxury of going out for a meal or heading off for a walk together because they've got screaming kids, they get the kids off to bed and they go off and do some more work and then just want to collapse into bed themselves?
So then what you do is you get a babysitter, or you find a way where you could drop them off at a friend's house, you and your wife can be alone, and you could have your own movie night, where you make popcorn and you sit down and you watch a movie together. And it's no different than that. Or you just go for a walk somewhere together and get away, and just you have to just recapture that, where you have this relationship that's separate from your kids. And that's got to be solid, or the kids will tear it apart by just different things that go on. And the beautiful thing about learning how to communicate effectively, though, is you're going to be modeling that for your children. When you begin to use a system of communication that is authentic and you're upfront about how things are going to be, your kids begin to adopt that. And they're going to be able to go out in the world and they're going to be able to be confident communicators. And so that's the other responsibility we have as parents is, you know, our kids are going to model our behavior, whether we think they are or not. They're seeing it every single day. They're seeing the patterns and they're going, that's what a dad's supposed to do. That's what a man's supposed to do. I still remember when my wife and I first started dating, I went around and opened her car door for her and she was like, oh my gosh. And I go, well, my mom told me when I was a boy, you need to open up a door for a woman. You need to make sure that you treat the woman that you love right. Well, any woman, really. I open the car for any woman that's getting in my car. I open the door for them. It's just a way that you're showing respect and that you care about them.
Yeah, so I think that's such a beautiful point you make there, because the other way I might challenge you is turn around and say, you know, well, what do you say to all these macho men who are like, oh, I'm not going to go all this gushy stuff, especially in front of my kids, I'm not going to lose face. But it's what you just said about the responsibility we actually have as parents to change the model and ensure that, you know, that if our children commit to long-term loving relationships, that they can enjoy that happiness, because it's not a happy place splitting up a relationship, especially when there are children involved.
Yeah.
And so what would you say to the okay, so I've got a woman who's listened to this show and thought, oh, you know what, I listened to this guy Mike Stewart from Men Talk to Your Woman, I loved what he had to say. That's probably what we need. You know, I want to kind of reignite the love. I want my husband or my partner, significant other, to be involved in this. This is something that might work. What can they say to their other person to reassure them that this is not they're not going to have to go all touchy-feely, soft and mushy? particularly if they are a bit macho, you know?
Right. So they don't have to cry. They don't have to go through whatever they don't want to. They could be their authentic self. But the main thing is that they communicate what they both want. And I did some coaching for in a program with a wife who her and her husband were living separate lives, but they both wanted things to be back the way they were when they were dating, but neither one of them talked about it. And I asked her, I said, so have you ever asked your husband what he wants your marriage to be like? And she said, no. I said, I'd like to give you the assignment to go and ask him that. And she asked him, and he said, I want a relationship to be back like when we were dating, when we were spending time together. But see, neither one of them talked about it. They both wanted it, but neither one of them talked about it. He'd go golfing with his buddies on the weekend. She would go do something else. And yet neither one of them said, hey, I want things to be back the way they were.
Isn't it
And so
silly? So simple and yet so effective.
Yeah.
It's the same, and the same with any aspect of coaching where we, well, what's your vision? Where are your goals? Oh, I never took the time to think about that. We take the relationship for granted as well, don't we? We never think about it. We just assume.
Yeah. Yeah.
And forget.
We let the pressures of life get in between us is what we do.
Yeah. And forget that it does require work, but the work doesn't have to be hard. It can be fun. Give yourself something to look forward to. Yeah. Final thoughts, Mike. What do you want to tell me? Last bit of advice.
A final thought. So the best advice I could give couples that even one, even the husband or wife who really wants to begin this work is to, think about what you want. Go back to looking at when you were dating. If that's what you valued most about your relationship, if that's what brings back the loving feelings, then those are the things that you need to focus on every single day. You need to wake up in the morning and you need to go, when my wife and I used to walk down the streets of Carmel, I was so in love. I remember the restaurant we went to. I could smell the coffee. You bring back all those feelings and all of the senses into this, and you're back in that coffee shop. I could picture myself walking down the streets of Carmel right now with my wife hand in hand. Yeah. And when you begin to do that on a daily basis, you begin to create that vision moving forward. And you're going to begin to feel different about your wife or your husband when you begin to recapture that. But if we continue to harbor and feed the negative stories that we have, then that really can't happen. Those things you have to switch those habits. You want to focus on the positive things you loved about your relationship and eliminate the negative things. And you can do that with practice. You can switch those thoughts in a moment's notice.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And exactly that, creating that vision and engaging with the feelings behind the vision as well to start resonating towards it. I love it. Thank you. And Mike, people can reach out to you from your website, mentalktoyourwoman.com, right?
That's correct, yes.
And on there is a contact page, so they can find out about your program, they can reach out to you, they can contact you through that.
Yes.
Great. You've inspired me to read something to finish off. I think you'll really approve of it. It's by Vex King, who of course is a Hay House author, and he writes a lot. He posted something on Instagram, and it's called To Love a Woman. Mm-hmm. You're going to love this, Mike. So I felt compelled to read it when you were talking about how much you love your wife. So here we go. So To Love a Woman by Vex King. Give her all of you in bits and pieces. That's nutrition to her heart. Despite the thousands of girls you may have entertained before, love her in 1,000 ways and take her to places she will never be able to walk to. Make her feel every inch of your thoughts so she loses control of her mind and body. Run your fingers through the hairs of her soul just to understand how she might be feeling. Clean the gorgeous mess she created when she destroyed herself by hiding what was destroying her. Turn her pain to poetry and perform it to her fears so they can find faith in the future. Listen to the lyrics in her silence, for they confess what's on her mind. Remove the illusion of time from your heart and understand that her love cannot be measured by a watch or a calendar. You like that?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That
I
is.
love that.
I'll take a photo and I'll send it to you.
Oh, please do. Please do.
Okay, so that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being an amazing guest, Mike. Beautiful, beautiful insights there about relationship building and communication, which is just fantastic. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being such a great guest today. And that's all we have time for. So please feel free, or please do hit the subscribe button so we can notify you when we have another episode coming up of Be Free, Be Fun, and Be Fearless, which of course you can either be watching this video or you may be listening to the podcast either on Spotify, Apple, or on Anchor. So, but that's all we have time for. So I am Dr. Rana Al-Falaki. My 3 final words: be free, be fun, be fearless. Bye-bye for now.